Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal Anna was wholly unprepared for the web of darkness she would uncover when she began her quiet investigation into Vaughn's classified background. Initially, it was a routine clearance review, a standard inquiry intended to validate his credibility within the WSB and ensure he posed no operational risk. But the deeper Anna dug, the more disoriented she became, as if each encrypted file she unlocked was a trapdoor into a subterranean labyrinth the WSB never wanted her to find. What started as an administrative formality evolved rapidly into a treacherous descent into the underworld of state-sanctioned manipulation. Layer by layer, behind the firewalls and obfuscated server routes, she unearthed a project codenamed Thanatos Protocol, a program operating under the seemingly academic guidance of Professor Henry Dalton at Port Charles University. On the surface, it bore all the traits of an advanced behavioral neuroscience initiative, purportedly researching how to treat trauma through controlled neural stimulation. But the truth was far more terrifying than any scientific breakthrough. What made Anna's blood run cold wasn't just the ethics-violating nature of the research, it was discovering that the shadow funding for Thanatos Protocol was tied directly to Jen Sidwell, the most cunning and vengeful adversary Sonny had ever encountered. Sidwell, already under scrutiny for his subterranean rise in political and economic influence, had been laundering millions through charitable grants and research foundations to back this academic pursuit. But the data proved clear. Thanatos was never about healing. It was about control, neurological domination disguised in the robes of scholarly innovation. Anna read in silence, her fingers trembling as she navigated encrypted files that documented real human subjects, civilians, veterans, even adolescents from underprivileged neighborhoods, who had unknowingly become test cases for invasive cerebral mapping and cognitive stimulation. This wasn't theoretical. Brain scans, behavior logs, and stimulation reaction data littered the project folders like trophies. Worse, another tier of research outlined an algorithmic focus on specific, influential subjects, individuals whose psychological profile suggested they wielded disproportionate sway in their communities. Sonny was listed as Subject 01, the primary case study. His behavioral patterns, emotional reactivity, and decision-making heuristics had all been harvested through unauthorized surveillance, including illegal bugging devices planted near his homes and business holdings. Anna's breath caught as she realized the ultimate aim, to refine a system of artificial neural interference that could subtly disrupt cognitive stability in high-influence figures, men like Sonny, thereby destabilizing the power structures of entire communities. With those figures compromised, Sidwell could move in, controlling the political and economic vacuum left in their collapse. It wasn't just immoral. It was warfare, and it had been happening right under her nose. She knew immediately that no one in the upper echelons of WSB could be trusted. Too many had either turned a blind eye or been enticed by the same promises of influence and wealth that Sidwell dangled before them. Anna decided that she would act, alone if she had to. She devised a counter-operation with ruthless precision. If the data servers housing Thanatos Protocol were destroyed, the project would be set back years, if not eliminated entirely. The primary server room was located deep beneath PCU, disguised as a climate-controlled archive vault beneath Dalton's lab wing. Surveillance was minimal, hidden behind the illusion of harmless university infrastructure. Under cover of night, Anna infiltrated the facility using outdated yet still effective WSB access protocols. Within the dim hum of server racks, she planted a custom worm, a self-replicating virus designed to scramble file indexes, overwrite neural datasets, and leave behind dummy logs to mislead any forensic audits. She worked quickly, her pulse racing, fully aware that any misstep could place her squarely in Sidwell's crosshairs. Before slipping out, she programmed the system to display a fabricated diagnostic error, suggesting an internal update failure had corrupted the entire database. As she disappeared into the shadows, the core of Thanatos Protocol died behind her, its malicious legacy buried in twisted code and blackened circuits. But Anna had miscalculated one crucial variable, the presence of Joss. The young woman, secretly recruited into a splinter unit of the WSB, had been embedded within the same research environment, working covertly to expose the very atrocities Anna had just destroyed. Joss had no idea that Vaughn, her handler and mentor, was actually reporting not only to Dalton, but directly to Sidwell as well. Her mission, though noble, was now in ruins. The data she had been meticulously collecting to bring the program to light was gone. Worse, in destroying the servers, Anna had inadvertently exposed Joss's presence by eliminating the layer of digital camouflage that had kept her activities off the radar. Suddenly, Joss found herself without cover. Surveillance systems reactivated on emergency protocol, capturing anomalous activity in the data network. Red flags were triggered across WSB systems, and those loyal to Sidwell began tracing the breach. With her position compromised and Vaughn no longer trustworthy, Joss had no choice but to flee PCU. She disappeared into the night with only what she could carry, aware she was being tracked not just by Sidwell's operatives, but perhaps by the WSB itself. Her mission had become a liability. Her knowledge made her a target. Anna, meanwhile, returned to her safe house with the grim knowledge that while she had neutralized a critical threat, she had also unintentionally endangered an innocent. And not just any innocent, a girl with connections to Jason, to Carly, to Sonny. A girl whose identity and safety might now be in Jason's hands. Anna couldn't afford to dwell on guilt, but the image of Joss, young, brilliant, brave, and now hunted, stayed with her like a phantom. She had hoped to dismantle Sidwell's machine without collateral damage. Instead, she had triggered the next chapter of a covert war no one was fully prepared for. The ghosts of Thanatos protocol had not been exorcised. They had merely scattered into the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return. And Anna knew, the battle for Port Charles had only just begun. Jason had spent his life navigating impossible decisions, but the message he received late that night struck a nerve deeper than most. A secure, anonymous ping from an old contact, someone once embedded within WSB's Cyber Intelligence Division, came encrypted with a single sentence. Thanatos server grid has been annihilated. Subject Alpha 4, Joss, may now be in Sidwell's active scope. The words flickered across his screen like a silent alarm. Jason's instincts kicked in immediately. He had known something wasn't right when Anna started asking questions about Vaughn, and now this unexpected collapse of the neurological surveillance network confirmed his worst fears. Not only was a major operation disrupted, but Jocelyn had been exposed in the process. Jason's loyalty was a steel chain, forged over decades and anchored to the people he loved. Sonny was the man he had defended with blood, fire, and silence. But Carly, and by extension, Joss, occupied a sacred space in his soul that complicated every move. Now he was faced with a nightmare scenario. Report everything to Sonny to keep Port Charles safe from Sidwell's expanding influence, or bury what he knew to protect Jocelyn from becoming collateral damage in a war she had only just begun to understand. He couldn't have both. Either way, someone he loved would feel betrayed. He sat in the dark, reviewing layers of intercepted data and redacted communications, trying to piece together what Anna had done and what Sidwell now knew. The destruction of the Thanatos protocol wasn't just a technical failure, it was an act of war. And someone like Sidwell wouldn't let it pass unanswered. If Joss had been involved, even unknowingly, it was only a matter of time before she became a target, or worse, a bargaining chip. Meanwhile, Anna found herself bracing for consequences she could no longer outrun. She had left a trail, however faint, and the upper ranks of WSB were not as blind as she had once hoped. Word was spreading that the protocol's core systems had been wiped out by deliberate interference. Though no one had publicly accused her, Anna knew it was only a matter of time before Jack Brennan, WSB's current director, came calling. She had once trusted Brennan implicitly, but recent moves, his hesitancy to act against Sidwell, the reassignment of agents who asked too many questions, had begun to unearth new suspicions. Had Jack been compromised? Or worse, had he always been Sidwell's pawn? Her heart burned with the irony of it all, that she, a lifelong warrior for justice within the agency, might now be hunted as a saboteur. She didn't regret destroying Thanatos. What haunted her was the possibility that she had endangered a girl who hadn't yet learned how cruel the real world could be. As tension thickened in the shadows of power, Sonny felt the noose tightening. For weeks, he had known that Sidwell was positioning himself to seize control of the docks, of the flow of narcotics, of political leverage within city council chambers. But Sonny had assumed the war was confined to his familiar battlegrounds, warehouses, back alleys, financial transactions cloaked in offshore accounts. Now, as Jason delivered the chilling possibility that Jocelyn was connected to the WSB's Black Ops endeavors, Sonny stood still in a silence he rarely allowed himself. He thought of the young girl who used to sit on the Corinthos estate's patio, her head full of dreams and books, her smile disarming even the coldest soldier. She had called him Dad, once, even if not by blood, then by bond. To learn that she was wrapped in a web of espionage and artificial neurology, exposed to predators like Sidwell, was a betrayal not from her, but from the world itself. And yet, beneath the anger and confusion, Sonny could feel the truth radiating through his bones. Joss wasn't a traitor. She was a piece on someone else's board, moved without consent, manipulated through allegiance and illusion. He wrestled with the realization that this wasn't just about territory anymore. Sidwell wasn't looking to own a port. He was building a network of psychological domination, destabilizing community leaders, dismantling resistance by attacking the human mind itself. Sonny wasn't just fighting to keep Port Charles safe. He was fighting to stay himself, to protect the very identity that had kept him alive through every war he'd survived. And so, a dangerous quiet settled across the key players in this unfolding storm. Jason, torn between disclosure and protection, began planning exit routes for Joss while feeding Sonny only partial truths. Anna monitored encrypted traffic, hoping to intercept any signal that Brennan had unleashed investigators in her direction. And Sonny, now fully aware of how deep Sidwell's claws had sunk, started preparing for the inevitable. This was no longer a turf war, it was psychological warfare, and every ally he had might already be compromised. In the hidden corridors of Port Charles, beneath the smiling facades and political banter, a reckoning was growing. The choices Jason, Anna, and Sonny made in the coming days wouldn't just determine who survived. They would define what it meant to resist in a world where even your thoughts could be weaponized. And Jocelyn, once just a young woman navigating love and loyalty, was now standing at the very heart of that storm, unaware of just how far the consequences would reach. Each step that Anna, Jason, and Sonny took through the tangled corridors of deception brought them closer not to clarity, but to a dawning horror. They were all playing parts in a script that had been written long before any of them realized the theater existed. Separated by methods, loyalties, and scars, they each fought their battles in isolation, yet every path, every encrypted file, every frightened whisper eventually circled back to a singular, festering threat, Jen Sidwell. A man whose ambition wasn't limited to power in the conventional sense. Sidwell wanted something far more insidious. Control over thought, perception, and identity itself. His war was psychological, digital, and cellular. And now, with his new frontier quietly established within General Hospital, the stage for total subversion was set. Anna, hardened by decades of espionage, still found herself gasping at the scale of Sidwell's endgame. After destroying the Thanatos protocol at PCU, she had hoped to cripple his infrastructure. But Sidwell was no stranger to contingency planning. He had shifted his operation seamlessly, as if anticipating every move she would make. What disturbed her most wasn't that he continued, it was where he continued. General Hospital, once a place that symbolized healing and sanctuary for the people of Port Charles, had been hollowed out from the inside. Now it stood as a bastion of scientific progress, or so it appeared, concealing within its walls a silent war against cognition itself. Her investigation led her into layers of forged documents, ghost researchers, and facility access granted to non-existent departments. Psychiatry records were duplicated and rerouted. Behavioral evaluations now included questions that had no therapeutic value but were instead designed to gauge susceptibility to cognitive redirection. The more she unearthed, the clearer it became. Sidwell was building a population-level behavioral model, starting with individuals who were either emotionally volatile or neurologically compromised. His targets were not random, they were chosen for their relationships to Sonny, their psychological triggers, and their potential to destabilize the broader social fabric if corrupted. It was systemized, cold, and utterly brilliant. Jason, working in the periphery, had traced unusual expenditures and fake donors funneling millions into what was listed as a neurological wellness initiative at GH. But the data didn't add up. Certain patients, Michael, Sasha, even Willow, had been submitted to increasingly invasive tests under the guise of post-trauma monitoring. Jason found encrypted signatures buried in medical device firmware. A hallmark of neurotracking software that transmitted data to private servers in Geneva and Prague. This wasn't healthcare. It was silent occupation. The city wasn't under siege by bullets or fire, it was under siege by signal and suggestion. What terrified Jason most was the implication that those closest to them, their family, their friends, might already be compromised. Behavioral anomalies began stacking up. Michael had grown emotionally erratic. His decision-making in matters of family and business no longer aligned with the values he once held. Sasha had broken off contact without explanation, her progress in recovery seemingly undone by invisible pressure. Even Danny had reported to Jason that certain staff at GH seemed off, like they were watching him for something other than medical reasons. Jason knew paranoia well, but this was different. This was calculated manipulation. And he was running out of time to stop it. Sonny, meanwhile, was forced to confront the erosion of his kingdom not by force, but by whispers, by unexplained changes in behavior, by confusion seated between allies, and by the sense that every move he made was already known to someone else. He began to question everything. Conversations that once gave him comfort now felt staged. People he trusted began second-guessing his decisions. His own instincts, once his greatest asset, felt fogged, as though something in his mind had shifted ever so slightly out of alignment. It was only when Jason told him about the neuromanipulation research that Sonny felt the crushing realization, he might be next. Sidwell's brilliance lay in turning power against itself. By mapping Sonny's neurological profile, collected covertly over months through hidden sensors and audio scrapers, he could predict his reactions, his fears, even his vulnerabilities. And once that data was refined, it would be easy to replicate the pattern, to weaken his leadership subtly, gradually, without him even realizing it. A missed step here, a wrong word there. Loyalty eroded one grain at a time. The man who once ruled Port Charles through sheer will would become a shell of himself, and by the time he noticed, it would be too late. And yet, Sonny was not a man who surrendered. If anything, this revelation ignited something primal in him. He began to meet with old allies under complete radio silence, reviving safe houses and dead drops long thought obsolete. He instructed his people to check their homes and offices for surveillance, to audit every medical file, to observe themselves for inconsistencies. It wasn't trust he demanded now, it was vigilance. Because Sidwell had made one critical mistake, he had underestimated the power of human instinct. Sonny could feel the manipulation. And now that he knew it existed, he would fight it with everything he had. Meanwhile, Anna dove deeper into the WSB's infrastructure, desperate to determine how much of it had already been compromised. She discovered internal memos sent from Jack Brennan's office authorizing funding to third-party neuroresearch firms, many of which were just fronts for Sidwell's operations. She confronted the possibility that Brennan, once a friend, was either in Sidwell's pocket or far too naive to stop him. It no longer mattered. She would act alone if she had to. She began building a case, gathering evidence that could expose Sidwell on a global scale. But she knew the cost would be high. If she went public, her name, her career, and possibly her freedom would be destroyed. And Jason, ever the silent guardian, was already laying out his next move. He started extracting Jocelyn from whatever traceable network still had her location. She had become the most vulnerable piece on the board, and Jason knew that if Sidwell couldn't destabilize Sonny directly, he would go through her. And if Sidwell ever touched her, there would be no place on Earth he could hide. But even as they moved to counter the threat, Sidwell was already looking ahead. With General Hospital as his stronghold and the mines of Port Charles slowly bending to his will, he was preparing to expand. Phase 3 would involve the implantation of suggestion response implants in select patients, masked as experimental treatments. With full neural feedback loops established, he wouldn't just study thought, he would write it. He wouldn't just predict behavior, he would author it. And when the final blow came, it would not be in the form of an explosion or assassination. It would come in the form of a quiet vote against Sonny at a city council meeting, led by people he once trusted. It would come as a moment of doubt in Jason's mind when he needed clarity. It would come when Anna discovered that her own memory had been tampered with. The final victory wouldn't look like victory at all, it would look like consent. Because in Sidwell's war, the greatest weapon wasn't force. It was willing surrender. And no one, not Anna, not Jason, not even Sonny, was immune from the slow, invisible erosion of will that had already begun.